On a rain-slicked October night in downtown Boston, 8-year-old Noah Miller stood motionless beneath the flickering streetlights of Blackthorn District, his small fingers forming desperate signs to passing strangers who refused to meet his gaze. 3 blocks away, waitress Emma Sullivan, 26, witnessed the unthinkable, the most feared vampire sovereign in the Northern Territories emerging from his obsidian limousine and approaching the silent child. Cold wind carried the scent of impending frost as Emma's boots splashed through puddles reflecting neon lights, her body moving before her mind processed the danger. Her hands formed words in the air that no one else in this shadow-governed sector could understand, executing the most reckless act of intervention the night court had witnessed in decades. This is the story of how a silent boy with a bicycle sign and a waitress who remembered her deaf brother's language became entangled in a vampire king's hunt for justice. Subscribe now to discover how 3 broken souls forged an alliance that would shatter centuries of division between realms. Emma Sullivan had exactly 19 minutes to serve 14 plates, collect 3 abandoned credit card receipts, and clean the aftermath of a 7-year-old's birthday Sunday explosion before her shift ended at Rosie's Diner. The ancient wall clock with its perpetually slow minute hand mocked her efforts as she balanced 4 plates of comfort food along her forearm. "Table 9's still waiting on those cheese fries," Margot called from behind the register, not looking up from her phone, "and Stan says he's not letting you leave early again, even if you give him those sad eyes." Emma deposited the plates at table 12, a group of night shift hospital workers who barely glanced up from their exhausted huddle, and wiped a strand of copper hair from her face. Her fingertips were cracked from industrial-strength cleaner, and the small burn on her wrist from Monday's grease splatter had formed a perfect half-moon scar. "I'm not leaving early," Emma said, already moving toward the kitchen. "I just need to be out at exactly 11. Not 11:01, not 11:05. Exactly 11? What she didn't say was why. That the neighborhood transit curfew had been moved up another 30 minutes last week by the Blackthorn Accord, the delicately worded treaty between human municipal authorities and the vampire sovereignty that governed the Northeastern Territories. Missing the 11:17 bus meant taking the midnight line, which required special permits that cost 2 days' wages for anyone traveling through vampire-controlled districts after dark. Emma had learned to live with the ever-shifting restrictions since moving back to Boston last year. Most humans had. You adapted, kept your head down, worked your service job, and pretended not to notice when certain patrons never ordered food with their coffee or when their reflections behaved strangely in the diner's polished surfaces. "Order up!" Stan's voice boomed from the kitchen window, a massive plate of cheese fries appearing under the heat lamps. As Emma grabbed it, she caught sight of the corner television. The sound was muted, but the news ticker scrolled beneath footage of another community partnership celebration between human officials and vampire delegates. The elegant, dark-haired figure at the center needed no introduction, King Darius Blackthorn himself, looking as coldly perfect as he did on every billboard and public service announcement throughout the city. 3 years after the revelation, when vampires had emerged from centuries of shadow to establish official territories and governance structures, most humans still couldn't quite believe it. But the economic collapse that followed the pandemic had left governments worldwide vulnerable to exactly the kind of mutually beneficial arrangements that the vampire courts had proposed: protection, investment, and stability in exchange for certain concessions. Blood banks with donor incentive programs, revised nighttime commerce regulations, expanded civil twilight hours. Boston had become one of the model integrated territories under Blackthorn's rule, a carefully curated showcase of interspecies cooperation that glossy tourism pamphlets called historic collaboration, and that locals experienced as an increasingly complex web of restrictions, permits, and unspoken rules. The bell above the diner door chimed, and Emma's stomach dropped as 4 members of the night guard entered. The Vampire King's elite enforcement unit, dressed in their signature black uniforms with silver insignia. Their presence usually meant documentation checks, which meant delays, which meant possibly missing her bus. 3 coffees, 1 water, the tallest guard said as they slid into booth 5. Not a full inspection then, just a routine patrol stop. Emma delivered the cheese fries and moved to prepare the coffees, checking the clock again. 18 minutes until freedom, assuming nothing else went wrong. As she placed the coffee cups in front of the guards, carefully avoiding eye contact as was customary, her phone vibrated in her pocket. Emma never checked personal messages during shifts, but something, intuition or anxiety, made her slip it out while refilling sugar containers behind the counter. The text was from her neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy. "Is Noah with you? He's not in his room and his bike is gone. I fell asleep watching him. I'm sorry." Emma's hands froze. Noah Miller was the 8-year-old boy she watched on weekends while his mother worked overnight shifts at Massachusetts General. Since Mrs. Abernathy had broken her hip last month, she had been helping the elderly woman by checking on Noah when his mother was at work. The boy had been through enough already. His father killed during the chaotic early days of the revelation, and his voice lost to the trauma that followed. The last thing he needed was to be wandering alone after curfew in a district where human children were required to be indoors by sundown. "I'm at work. When did you last see him?" Emma typed quickly, her heart beginning to race. The reply came immediately. "Maybe 2 hours ago." His mother called to say the hospital asked her to stay until 3 a.m. I told him and went to make dinner. Then I sat down for just a minute and woke up just now. His bike is gone, Emma. "Sullivan, order up." Stan's voice snapped her back to the diner. Emma moved mechanically, delivering plates and refilling drinks while her mind raced through possibilities. Noah wouldn't have gone far. He was cautious and smart. But he was also a human child alone after curfew in Blackthorn District. Even with the supposed protections of the Accord, stories circulated about humans who violated curfew and were never seen again. At precisely 10:52 p.m., Emma untied her apron and approached Margot. "Family emergency," she said, her voice tight. "I need to go, now." Margot looked up from the register, prepared to object, then saw Emma's face. "Fine, but Stan's gonna—" "I know. I'll work a double tomorrow." Emma was already grabbing her coat from the back room. As she passed the night guard's table, she kept her eyes down and her pace steady, fighting the urge to run until she was safely outside. The October air hit her like a physical force, cold, damp, and heavy with the metallic scent that always preceded the first frost. Street lights reflected off wet pavement, and neon signs from the surrounding businesses cast eerie, shifting colors across buildings. Emma stood for a moment under the diner's awning, orienting herself in a neighborhood that transformed after dark. Noah lived 5 blocks east in one of the older apartment buildings that had narrowly escaped redevelopment when the district transitioned to vampire governance. If he'd left 2 hours ago on his bike, he could be anywhere in the district by now. Emma tried calling his mother, but the call went straight to voicemail. Hospital staff were often required to check phones during shifts in restricted areas. She began walking quickly, scanning side streets and alleyways. The Blackthorn district had once been a bustling residential neighborhood with family businesses and community spaces. Now it was an uneasy hybrid, upscale nighttime establishments with darkened windows catering to vampire clientele existed alongside human-owned daytime businesses struggling to adapt to the new economy. Emma passed a blood donation center with its sleek, clinical facade and recruitment posters promising tax incentives and health care benefits. "Contribute to community wellness," the digital display proclaimed in elegant script. Across the street, a former bakery had been converted into a twilight lounge with a line of both humans and vampires waiting behind velvet ropes. Some areas of the city had developed a certain cachet around vampire proximity, the thrill-seekers, the opportunists, the desperate. Emma had never understood the appeal. 3 blocks from the diner, she spotted a small figure standing motionless at a corner beneath a flickering streetlight. A child with a bike too large for his frame, holding a handwritten sign that Emma couldn't read from this distance. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by concern. Why would Noah be standing on a street corner with a sign? She was about to call out when a sleek black limousine with diplomatic plates glided to the curb near Noah. Emma froze, watching as the rear door opened and a tall figure emerged. Even from half a block away, there was no mistaking the commanding presence of King Darius Blackthorne himself. Emma had only seen the vampire sovereign on screens and in carefully staged public appearances. In person, he was both more and less than the carefully crafted image, taller, with an unsettling stillness that no camera quite captured. He moved with liquid precision toward Noah, who remained motionless, clutching his sign. Without conscious decision, Emma's legs were carrying her forward. Every instinct screamed danger, but the sight of a small, silent child facing the most powerful predator in the Northeast overrode her self-preservation. As she drew closer, she could read Noah's sign. "Buy my bike, $50 Mommy hasn't eaten in 2 days." The Vampire King stood before Noah, his expression unreadable as he studied the child. 2 security personnel had exited the limousine and flanked their sovereign, hands resting near concealed weapons. One spoke quietly into a communication device clipped to his collar. Noah's fingers began to move, forming signs that Emma recognized instantly, the language she had learned as a teenager when her younger brother lost his hearing to meningitis. The same language that had become part of her daily life until David's death 3 years ago. "Please buy my bike," Noah signed, his small hand shaking in the cold. "It's a good bike. I don't need it anymore." Without thinking, Emma stepped between them. "He's with me," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I apologize for any inconvenience, Your Majesty." She turned to Noah, her hands moving in the familiar patterns. "Noah, what are you doing out here? Everyone's worried about you." Noah's eyes widened in recognition, his hands moving rapidly. "I'm selling my bike so Mom can eat. She thinks I don't know she gives me her food. But I see her hiding her empty plates." The security personnel moved closer, but Darius raised one hand slightly, and they froze in place. "You understand his signs," the king said. It wasn't a question. Emma nodded, acutely aware of how easily the vampire monarch could end both their lives. The Night Guard operated with near absolute authority in Blackthorn District, and no human would question the disappearance of a waitress and a child who violated curfew. "Yes, Your Majesty." "What is he saying?" Darius asked, his voice carrying the faint accent of someone who had witnessed centuries pass. Emma hesitated, caught between the dangerous truth and a protective lie. "He's trying to sell his bike for his mother. She's been struggling recently." The king's eyes, a gray so pale it appeared almost silver in the streetlight, shifted to Noah, then back to Emma. "That sign says his mother hasn't eaten in 2 days. Is this accurate?" Again Emma hesitated. Sarah Miller worked endless shifts at the hospital, qualified for minimal assistance under the new regulations, and had been caught in the impossible mathematics of raising a child alone in an economy designed to extract maximum productivity for minimal compensation. "His mother is a healthcare worker," Emma said carefully. "The transition to the new payment structures has been challenging for many hospital staff." Something flickered across the king's features, so brief Emma might have imagined it. He turned to one of his security personnel and spoke too quietly for Emma to hear. The guard nodded and returned to the limousine. "What is your name?" Darius asked, addressing Emma directly. "Emma Sullivan, Your Majesty." "And the boy?" "Noah Miller." She placed a protective hand on Noah's shoulder. "His mother works at Massachusetts General. She's on shift until early morning." Darius studied them both for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Ms. Sullivan, you and the child will come with me." It wasn't a request. Emma felt Noah's small body tense beneath her hand. "May I ask where, Your Majesty?" To address this situation properly, the king gestured toward the waiting limousine. "I find myself curious about a child willing to sell his possessions for his parents' welfare and about the systems that have made such sacrifice necessary." Emma's mind raced through scenarios, none of them promising. The Blackthorn Accord technically prohibited harm to law-abiding humans, but law-abiding had become an increasingly narrow category. Noah was breaking curfew. She was interfering with the night guard. Both were punishable offenses. As if reading her thoughts, Darius added, "You have my assurance of safety, for both of you." The word of a vampire king was binding, one of the few certainties in the New World Order. They might be predators, but they adhered to their own codes with rigid precision. Emma knelt beside Noah, signing quickly. "He wants us to go with him. I won't leave you. If you're scared, we can try to—" Noah's hands moved decisively. "Mom says King Blackthorn makes the rules. Maybe he can help her." "I'm not afraid." The simple trust in his expression broke something in Emma's chest. He was too young to understand the complex power dynamics at play, too innocent to recognize the danger. "We'll go," Emma said, rising to face the king. "But I need to let his neighbor know he's safe." Darius nodded once. As Emma texted Mrs. Abernathy a carefully worded message, a guard loaded Noah's bicycle into a second vehicle that had silently appeared behind the limousine. The interior of the king's car was unsurprisingly luxurious, soft leather seating and privacy glass separating them from the driver. What Emma hadn't expected was the tablet computer that immediately extended from a hidden compartment once they were seated. "Please enter the mother's contact information," Darius instructed. "My staff will ensure she is notified of her son's whereabouts." Emma glanced at Noah, who nodded, then entered Sarah Miller's number into the system. The king touched a sensor on the car door, and a compartment revealed a selection of beverages and small sealed packages. "The child appears cold," he observed. "There are hot drinks available." The clinical detachment in his tone made Emma want to pull Noah closer, shield him from this predator's dispassionate assessment. Instead, she selected a hot chocolate packet, which the car's systems quickly transformed into a steaming cup. As they traveled through the city streets, Emma noticed how traffic parted before them, how even the street lights seemed to coordinate their timing to allow smooth passage. The vampire king gazed out the window, his profile sharp against the passing lights. Noah sipped his hot chocolate, his free hand occasionally forming small signs that Emma pretended not to notice, questions about where they were going, whether his mother would be angry, if the king could really help. Emma had assumed they would be taken to the imposing Blackthorn Tower that dominated the downtown skyline, the administrative heart of vampire governance. Instead, the limousine turned toward Beacon Hill and wound up narrow streets lined with historic homes until it stopped before an elegant townhouse with discreet security features integrated into its classic architecture. "A more appropriate setting for a child," Darius explained, noting Emma's confusion. "The tower can be intimidating to humans." The townhouse interior revealed an unexpected blend of historic preservation and modern technology. Original woodwork and period details remained intact, while nearly invisible smart systems controlled lighting, temperature, and security. A staff member, human to Emma's surprise, greeted them in the foyer. "Ms. Sullivan and Noah Miller will be our guests tonight," the king informed her. "Please prepare suitable accommodations and notify me when Ms. Miller arrives from her hospital shift." "Of course, Your Majesty." The woman, middle-aged with a practical bob of silver-streaked hair, gave a small bow before turning a warm smile to Noah. "Would you like something to eat, young man? The kitchen is fully stocked." Noah looked to Emma, who nodded encouragingly. His hands moved in careful signs. "Yes, please." "And can you save some for my mom?" Emma translated, her voice catching slightly. The staff member's expression softened as she nodded. "We'll make sure there's plenty for your mother, too." As Noah followed the woman toward what Emma presumed was the kitchen, Darius gestured toward a study off the main hallway. "Ms. Sullivan, a word." The study was exactly what one might expect from a centuries-old sovereign. Leather-bound books lining floor-to-ceiling shelves, a massive desk of dark wood, and subtle displays of antiquities that Emma suspected museums would covet. The king closed the door and moved to stand by a window overlooking a small, immaculately maintained garden. "How long has the boy been unable to speak?" he asked, without preamble. Since the revelation, Emma answered carefully. His father was killed during the early conflicts. Noah witnessed it. And you learned sign language for him? No, Emma paused. My younger brother was deaf. I learned for him years ago. Was? He died. 3 years ago. The familiar pain tightened her chest. The king turned from the window, studying her with unsettling intensity. Yet you maintain the skill. It becomes part of you, Emma said simply, like any language. Darius moved to his desk and activated a display embedded in its surface. Information scrolled beneath his fingertips. Medical records, employment files, financial data. Emma recognized Sarah Miller's hospital ID photo. Single mother, surgical nurse, working primarily night shifts, he summarized. Wage reductions following the healthcare reorganization. Minimal support system. His fingers traced a pattern on the desk, and new information appeared. And the boy. Trauma-induced selective mutism, no ongoing therapeutic support despite medical recommendations. He looked up at Emma. Why? Not covered under the revised insurance structures, Emma said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Therapeutic services for humans were classified as elective under Appendix C of the Accord. Something dangerous flickered in the king's expression. You're quite familiar with the technical aspects of the Accord. Emma realized her mistake too late, showing too much knowledge, too much awareness. Humans who paid too much attention to policy details often found themselves classified as potential disruptors under the new governance system. I try to understand the rules, she said carefully, to stay compliant. Indeed. Darius closed the display with a gesture. Ms. Sullivan, I find myself concerned with several aspects of this situation. The healthcare reorganization was implemented to increase efficiency and resource optimization. It was not intended to result in medical professionals unable to feed themselves or their children. The clinical language, efficiency, optimization, resources made Emma's jaw tighten. Before she could stop herself, she asked, what was it intended to do, exactly? As soon as the words left her mouth, she regretted them. Questioning vampire authority, even indirectly, was dangerous territory. To her surprise, Darius appeared to consider the question seriously. To create a sustainable system that serves both populations. Vampires require functioning human health care. We may be immortal, but we are not immune to all injuries. Humans require viable economic structures, he paused. Clearly, adjustments are necessary if the current implementation has produced unintended consequences. Emma thought of Sarah Miller working through exhaustion to keep a roof over their heads, of Noah, silent since witnessing violence no child should see, now trying to sell his most valued possession so his mother could eat. Unintended consequences, she repeated quietly. Is that what we're calling hunger now? She had gone too far. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as the king's expression shifted to something ancient and predatory. Emma felt the primal fear that had kept humans alive for millennia in the presence of apex predators. You speak quite boldly for someone in your position, Darius observed, his voice soft but carrying an undercurrent that raised the hair on Emma's arms. I apologize, Your Majesty, she said quickly. I'm concerned for the boy. As am I. The king's expression became unreadable once more, which is why I intend to investigate how a healthcare professional working in a royal-sponsored facility can be reduced to such circumstances while the administration reports record efficiency metrics. Before Emma could respond, a subtle tone sounded, and the king touched a sensor on his desk. Yes? The Miller woman has arrived, Your Majesty, came a voice from an unseen speaker. She appears distressed. Bring her to the blue reception room. Darius turned to Emma. Shall we? Sarah Miller stood in the center of an elegantly appointed sitting room, still wearing her hospital scrubs under a worn coat, her dark hair escaping what had once been a neat bun. Her eyes, the same deep brown as Noah's, widened when she saw Emma enter behind the Vampire King. Ms. Miller? Darius began formally. I apologize for the unconventional nature of this meeting. "Where is my son?" Sarah's voice was steady despite the fear evident in her posture. "Mom." Noah appeared in a doorway opposite, breaking into a run. Sarah dropped to her knees, catching him in a fierce embrace. His hands began moving rapidly, too quick for Emma to follow completely, explaining about the bike and the sign and how the king had brought them in his special car. Sarah looked up, her arms still around Noah. "I don't understand." "Why is my son here? What's happening?" Darius gestured to comfortable seating arranged around a fireplace where flames had sprung to life as they entered. "Please, sit. There are matters we must discuss." For the next 20 minutes, Emma watched as the Vampire King methodically deconstructed the events that had led to this moment. The healthcare system reorganization, the wage reductions, the assistance program restrictions, and the precise financial calculations that had left a full-time nurse unable to adequately feed herself and her child. "Your work record is exemplary," Darius noted, reviewing information on a tablet. "Yet your compensation has been reduced by 37% over the past year. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Sarah glanced at Noah, who had curled against her side, his eyes growing heavy despite the tension in the room. The transition to the new system, many departments were reclassified. Surgical nurses were moved to a different compensation tier. She hesitated. "We were told it was temporary. That efficiency bonuses would eventually make up the difference." "But they haven't," Darius stated. "No," Sarah admitted. "Each quarter, the metrics change. The targets move. We work more hours with fewer staff, but somehow we never quite reach the bonus thresholds." She stroked Noah's hair. "I'm not complaining. We're managing." "By not eating for 2 days?" The king's tone was deceptively mild. Sarah's face flushed. "Noah exaggerates. I've been prioritizing certain expenses. His needs come first. A child attempting to sell his possessions so his mother can eat is not managing, Ms. Miller. It is a system failure." Darius set the tablet aside. "As sovereign of this territory, I find this situation unacceptable." Emma watched Sarah's expression shift from fear to confusion. "I don't understand. Why would you care about one human family's finances?" It was the question Emma had been wondering herself. Vampire governance operated on macro-level systems and statistics. Individual human hardships were considered acceptable variables in the larger equations of territorial management. "The Blackthorn Accord guarantees certain standards for humans within our jurisdiction," Darius answered. "Your situation indicates those standards are not being maintained. More concerning is that this appears to be a systemic rather than isolated issue." He turned to Emma. "Ms. Sullivan, you recognize the boy's situation immediately. How many others like him are there in your community?" Emma thought of the increasing number of her neighbors working multiple jobs, of the community meal programs operating beyond capacity, of the quiet desperation creeping through human sectors as vampire-owned corporations optimized for maximum efficiency with minimal labor costs. "Many," she said simply. "More every month." Something shifted in the king's expression. A calculation being made, a decision reached. "This requires further investigation." He turned back to Sarah. "Ms. Miller, you and your son will remain here tonight. Tomorrow we will address your immediate situation and begin examining the broader systemic issues." "But my shift," Sarah began. "Has been covered," Darius cut in smoothly. "The hospital administrator was most accommodating when informed of the royal interest in your circumstances." The subtle emphasis on royal interest sent a chill down Emma's spine. The king wasn't merely helping a hungry family, he was sending a message to those responsible for their condition. Sarah seemed to understand this too, her expression shifting from confusion to cautious hope. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Darius inclined his head slightly, then turned to Emma. "Ms. Sullivan, I would like you to return tomorrow evening. Your perspective on these community issues will be valuable, and your ability to communicate with Noah may prove useful." It wasn't quite an order, but neither was it truly a request. Emma thought of her weekend shifts at the diner, of the bills waiting in her apartment, of the carefully calibrated balance of her own precarious finances. "I work until 4 tomorrow," she said. "Arrangements will be made with your employer," Darius replied, as if the matter were already settled. "A car will collect you at 5. As Emma prepared to leave, Noah broke away from his mother and ran to her, his hands moving in rapid signs. "Thank you for helping. Will you come back tomorrow?" Emma knelt to his level, signing back. "Yes, I'll come back. Be good for your mom." His small arms wrapped around her neck in a fierce hug before he ran back to Sarah, who mouthed a silent "thank you" over his head. Outside, a different car waited to take Emma home, still luxurious but less ostentatious than the king's limousine. As she settled into the leather seat, exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed her. The events of the evening seemed dreamlike: a silent boy with a desperate sign, an encounter with the vampire sovereign, and somehow improbably the beginnings of what might be meaningful change. Or it could all be an elaborate game, she reminded herself. Vampires were known for their long-term strategies, their willingness to sacrifice pawns for positional advantage centuries in the making. Perhaps they were all just pieces being moved across an invisible board. As the car glided through nighttime streets, Emma gazed at the city that had transformed so dramatically in recent years. The gleaming vampire-owned structures rose alongside deteriorating human neighborhoods, the physical manifestation of the new social order. Somewhere in this uneven landscape, a balance had been lost, or perhaps had never truly existed. Tomorrow she would return to the Vampire King's residence, stepping further into a world she didn't fully understand. For tonight, she allowed herself the small comfort that Noah and Sarah would sleep with full stomachs under a secure roof. Sometimes, in a world of complex systems and immortal politics, the most meaningful victories were measured in the simplest human needs met: food, shelter, safety, hope. It wasn't enough, but it was a beginning. The Massachusetts General Hospital administrative offices occupied the renovated top floor of the East Wing, all sleek surfaces and subdued lighting designed to project efficiency and authority. Hospital Director Lawrence Phillips had arrived at work to find 2 members of the night guard stationed outside his office door, an unprecedented development that had sent ripples of anxiety throughout the administrative staff. Director Phillips, King Darius greeted him without ceremony as he entered his own office. "I trust you received the data request I sent this morning." Phillips, a tall, thin man with meticulously groomed silver hair and the perpetual expression of someone calculating costs, faltered slightly. "Your Majesty, this is an unexpected honor. Yes, I've assembled the information you requested, though I must admit some confusion regarding—" "The purpose?" Darius supplied, standing by the window overlooking the hospital complex below. "Financial discrepancies have come to my attention, specifically regarding the compensation restructuring implemented last year." Phillips moved cautiously to his desk, activating a display. Everything was executed according to the approved protocols. The healthcare efficiency directives outlined in Addendum 4 of the Accord were designed to optimize service delivery while maintaining appropriate human compensation levels, Darius interrupted. "Yet, I find one of your surgical nurses unable to adequately feed herself while working full-time. Explain this discrepancy." Phillips's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, anxiety giving way to calculation. "Individual cases can sometimes reflect personal financial management issues rather than systemic." "No." The single word, delivered with quiet intensity, stopped Phillips mid-sentence. "I've reviewed the data. Surgical nursing staff have experienced compensation reductions averaging 35%, while administrative bonuses have increased 72%. This was not the approved model. Market adjustments were necessary to remain competitive," Phillips argued, sweat beading at his temples despite the office's careful climate control. "The transition period has been challenging, but our projections indicate—" "Your projections," Darius cut in, "appear designed to justify continued resource diversion from frontline staff to administration." He moved to the desk, touching the display to bring up different data, charts showing steadily declining wages alongside increasing administrative costs. This implementation violates both the letter and spirit of the accord. Phillips's breathing quickened. There may have been some creative interpretations of certain guidelines, but nothing that what, Director? Nothing that would warrant royal intervention? Darius's eyes had taken on a dangerous gleam. I disagree. The door opened, and a young woman entered carrying a substantial file folder. Emma, who had been observing silently from a corner of the office, recognized her as one of the king's aides who had been present at the townhouse the previous night. "The complete audit, Your Majesty," the aide said, placing the folder on Phillips's desk. "Thank you, Ms. Chen," Darius gestured to the folder. "My financial oversight team has been quite thorough, Director Phillips. They've identified approximately $17 million diverted from frontline staff compensation to administrative efficiency bonuses over the past 11 months. Phillips's face had gone ashen. There must be some mistake. The board approved all compensation structures, and the quarterly reports were falsified, Darius finished for him. Rather convincingly, I might add. Had the discrepancies affected vampire personnel or blood supply management, they would have been caught immediately, but as they primarily impacted human staff, he let the implication hang in the air. Emma watched the hospital director's composure crumble as he realized the magnitude of his situation. Vampires valued many things: power, efficiency, control, but perhaps above all, they valued honesty. Deception was considered the gravest offense in their legal code, particularly when it involved agreements between humans and vampires. "The restructuring will be reversed immediately," Darius continued. "Back wages will be calculated and distributed. And you, Director Phillips, will be replaced, effective tomorrow." "You can't," Phillips began, then stopped himself, remembering who he was addressing. "The board must approve any leadership changes. The board has already been notified of the audit findings." Darius's tone was matter-of-fact. "They've expressed their full support for immediate corrective action." Emma suspected full support likely came after significant pressure from the vampire court, but the result was the same. In less than 24 hours, the king had identified the root cause of Sarah Miller's situation and enacted a solution that would affect hundreds of hospital employees. As they left the director's office, Emma found herself walking beside the vampire sovereign through corridors that quickly cleared before them. Medical staff pressed themselves against walls, eyes downcast as the king passed. "You appear troubled, Miss Sullivan," Darius observed, without looking at her. "I'm processing," Emma admitted. "This will help Sarah and others like her, but you question whether it addresses the fundamental imbalances in the system," he finished for her. Emma hesitated, then nodded. "One hospital's wage structure doesn't explain children selling bicycles so their parents can eat." "Indeed." Darius stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Which is why this is merely the beginning. The hospital situation represents a symptom, not the disease." A nurse hurried past, nearly dropping her tablet when she realized who was standing in the corridor. Darius waited until she had disappeared around a corner before continuing. "I require someone who understands both sides of our arrangement, someone who can identify where the Accord's implementation has failed to serve its intended purpose." His pale eyes studied her with unnerving intensity. "Someone who speaks the language of those unable to advocate for themselves." Emma suddenly understood why she had been brought along today, why the king had taken such interest in Noah's situation. "You want me to be some kind of liaison?" "I want you to be honest," Darius corrected. "The vampires responsible for implementing the Accord report only successes. The humans affected by its failures fear speaking out. This creates a dangerous information vacuum. And filling that vacuum serves your interests how, exactly?" Emma couldn't help asking. A hint of something like approval flickered in the king's expression. "Stability requires sustainable systems. Hungry children selling possessions indicates a system that will eventually collapse. I prefer to adjust course before reaching that point. Pragmatic self-interest, not compassion." Emma wasn't surprised, but she found herself oddly disappointed nonetheless. What would this role involve? Initially evaluating implementation issues across key sectors: healthcare, housing, education, employment. Darius began walking again, forcing Emma to keep pace. You would have authority to investigate complaints, access to necessary data, and direct reporting access to my office. And if I find problems, real, structural problems, they will be addressed. Just like that, Darius stopped at an intersection of corridors, turning to face her again. Ms. Sullivan, contrary to human fiction, vampires are not inherently cruel. We are practical. A territory where humans cannot meet basic needs is unstable and therefore unprofitable. Addressing these imbalances serves everyone's interests. Not compassion, then, but enlightened self-interest. Still, the results would be the same for people like Sarah and Noah. I have a job, Emma said, rent to pay. The position would provide compensation commensurate with its responsibilities, Darius replied, and housing within the secure district, if desired. Emma thought of her small apartment with its unreliable heating, of the endless double shifts at the diner, of the careful mathematics of survival that consumed so much of her energy. And if I find nothing, she asked, if I report that everything is functioning perfectly? Something dangerous glinted in the king's eyes. Then you would be lying, and we both know what vampires think of liars. Before Emma could respond, a small figure came barreling around the corner, Noah with Sarah hurrying after him. The boy's hands moved rapidly as he spotted Emma, signing about the hospital tour he'd been given and the special lunch they'd had in the doctor's lounge. Emma knelt to his level, her hands moving in response. That sounds amazing. Are you having a good day? Noah nodded enthusiastically, then turned to the king, his hands forming careful signs. Thank you for helping my mom. She's smiling again. Emma translated automatically, watching as Darius regarded the child with an unreadable expression. After a moment, the Vampire King inclined his head in a formal acknowledgement. You're quite welcome, Noah, he replied, his tone neither patronizing nor childish. Your mother's work is valuable. She deserves proper recognition. Sarah approached more cautiously, offering a formal curtsy. Your Majesty, I don't know how to express my gratitude. The hospital administrator informed me this morning about the compensation adjustments and it will change everything for us. It is merely correction of an improper implementation, Darius replied. Nothing more. But Emma noticed how the king's eyes followed Noah's animated signing, how he seemed to study the boy's expressions and movements with genuine curiosity. The boy communicates quite effectively, Darius observed, yet receives no therapeutic support. Sarah's expression faltered. The revised insurance doesn't cover— It will now, Darius interrupted. Ms. Chen will provide details before you leave today. Noah tugged at Emma's sleeve, signing quickly. Is he fixing things? Mom said he's fixing things. Emma signed back, aware of the king watching their exchange. Yes, he's helping fix some problems. Noah considered this, then turned to Darius, his hands forming careful, deliberate signs. Without thinking, Emma translated aloud. Can you learn my language too? Then I could tell you things myself. The request, so simple and direct, seemed to catch the vampire sovereign off guard. For a brief moment, the carefully controlled mask slipped, revealing something almost human beneath. I'm afraid I don't have your natural aptitude for languages, Darius replied after a moment. But perhaps Ms. Sullivan could teach me a few basics. Noah beamed, his hands moving excitedly. It's easy. I can help too. As Emma translated, she caught Sarah's eye, the same surprise she felt reflected in the mother's expression. The Vampire King learning sign language from a human child was beyond unlikely. It was unprecedented. A worthy endeavor for another time, Darius said smoothly, checking a sleek watch on his wrist. Ms. Miller, Ms. Sullivan and I must attend to other matters now. Ms. Chen will ensure all your questions are answered before you leave. As the aide appeared to escort Sarah and Noah, Darius turned to Emma. You haven't answered my proposal. Emma watched Noah signing animatedly to his mother as they walked away. A child who had been silent for years, now expressing himself without restraint. She thought of the others like him, struggling under systems theoretically designed for mutual benefit, but practically implemented for maximum extraction. "I'll do it," she said, "on one condition." Darius raised an eyebrow. "You're in a position to set conditions?" "I am, if you actually want honest assessment, rather than someone who will tell you what you want to hear." Emma met his gaze steadily. "I want to establish community centers in each district, safe spaces where humans can learn adaptive skills, including sign language classes for families who need them." For a long moment, the Vampire King regarded her with an expression she couldn't interpret. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "A reasonable investment in long-term stability. Ms. Chen will work with you on implementation details." As they walked toward the hospital exit, Emma felt the weight of what she had just committed to, becoming the voice for those who, like Noah, had been rendered voiceless by circumstances beyond their control. "You'll face resistance," Darius warned as they approached the entrance where his car waited, "from both sides. Humans will distrust your association with my court. Vampires will resent your access to information they'd prefer to control." "I'm aware," Emma replied. "And you still accept?" Emma thought of Noah's sign, "Mommy hasn't eaten in 2 days," of the desperate mathematics of survival that had driven a child to sell his most precious possession, of all the others like him struggling silently within a system that had promised protection but delivered something quite different. "Yes," she said simply, "I accept." As they stepped outside, the autumn sunlight, weak but present, caught the king's features at an angle that emphasized how very inhuman he was beneath the careful veneer of civilization. A predator who had ruled for centuries, who had witnessed empires rise and fall, who measured success in decades rather than days. Yet he had stopped for one silent child with a handwritten sign. Perhaps there was hope in that, not in grand proclamations or theoretical frameworks, but in individual moments of recognition, in seeing those rendered invisible by the very systems designed to protect them. Emma didn't harbor illusions that one Vampire King's interest in systemic failures would transform society overnight. But for Sarah and Noah Miller, change had already come. For others like them, it might now be possible. In a world of shifting boundaries between human and vampire territories, perhaps the most important borders were those between visibility and invisibility, between voice and silence. Emma had spent years interpreting for her brother, bridging worlds that struggled to communicate. Now she would do the same on a larger scale, translating the unspoken needs of her community to those with the power to address them. It wasn't a perfect solution, but like Noah with his carefully formed signs, it was a beginning, a way to be heard in a world that had stopped listening. 6 months later, Emma stood in the community center that had once been an abandoned recreation building in the heart of Blackthorn District. The space hummed with activity, adults practicing job skills in one room, children receiving tutoring in another, and in the main hall, a sign language class led by a now confident Noah Miller, demonstrating hand positions to a mixed group of human and vampire students. "He's quite the natural teacher," Darius observed, appearing beside Emma with the unsettling silence characteristic of his kind. "He's found his voice," Emma replied, watching as Noah patiently corrected a vampire council member's finger placement. "In more ways than one." The changes of the past months had been remarkable, if imperfect. Emma's investigations had uncovered dozens of implementation issues in the Accord, places where theoretical protections had been undermined by practical applications. Some had been resolved with simple administrative adjustments. Others had required more substantial interventions, including the replacement of several key officials who had prioritized short-term efficiency over sustainable systems. Not everyone had supported these changes. Emma had received threats from both human extremists who viewed any collaboration with vampires as betrayal and vampire traditionalists who considered human welfare irrelevant to territorial governance. Yet the results spoke for themselves: stabilized housing costs, restored healthcare access, educational initiatives that served mutual interests. The quarterly assessment shows a 17% increase in human productivity metrics, Darius noted, watching the class with an unreadable expression, and a 23% decrease in territorial security incidents. Emma had grown accustomed to the king's tendency to quantify everything in terms of efficiency and productivity. Behind the clinical language, she recognized what he was actually saying. Humans who weren't desperate were more productive and less likely to cause problems. People who can meet basic needs have energy to contribute in meaningful ways, she translated. Revolutionary concept. The faintest hint of amusement flickered across Darius's features. Indeed. Noah had noticed them and was now signing enthusiastically in their direction. To Emma's continued surprise, Darius responded with careful, precise signs, basic phrases he had committed to learning despite his initial reluctance. The king would never be fluent, but his willingness to learn even rudimentary signs had sent a powerful message throughout the territory. The hospital board is voting on the new staff compensation structure today, Darius said, returning to business. I anticipate approval, though certain members remain resistant to change. Emma had attended enough council meetings over the past months to recognize the subtle threat beneath his words. Those who continued to obstruct reforms often found themselves reassigned to less desirable positions. And the education initiative, she asked? Implementation begins next month. All human children will receive adequate preparation to participate effectively in the integrated economy. It wasn't the passionate language of human rights that Emma might have preferred, but she had learned to recognize progress in vampire terms. Adequate preparation meant restored funding for public education. Participate effectively meant actual opportunities rather than mere subsistence. Sarah Miller approached, now dressed in the navy blue uniform that identified her as part of the hospital's senior nursing staff. The promotion had come with the systemic reforms, recognition of her years of experience and dedication. Your Majesty, she greeted the king with the formal bow that protocol required. Emma, Noah wants to show you both what his class has accomplished. The demonstration that followed was simple but powerful. 20 students of various ages performing a song in sign language. Among them were hospital administrators, council members, and community leaders who 6 months ago would never have considered learning a human accommodation. As Emma watched, she felt a cautious optimism she hadn't experienced since before the revelation. The world had changed irrevocably. Vampires were now an acknowledged part of society, their power and influence undeniable. But perhaps coexistence didn't have to mean subjugation. Perhaps it could mean adaptation on both sides. You've accomplished much in a short time, Darius observed, as they left the community center later. The council reports significant improvements across all monitored sectors. There's still so much to do, Emma replied. The outer districts haven't seen nearly the same level of reform, and the housing situation remains critical in sectors 7 and 9. One strategic change at a time, Darius said, using one of Emma's phrases that he had adopted. The foundation must be solid before building higher. As they walked toward the waiting car, Emma noticed a small memorial garden beside the community center, a peaceful space with benches and flowering plants centered around a simple stone marker. She paused, surprised to see her brother's name engraved there, alongside others lost during the turbulent early days of the revelation. When did this happen? She asked, her voice catching slightly. The community requested a remembrance space, Darius replied. It seemed appropriate to acknowledge the transition costs. Transition costs. Such a clinical term for lives lost, families shattered, worlds forever changed. Yet the acknowledgement itself represented something significant. Recognition that the new order had come at a price, one paid primarily by humans like David Sullivan and Noah's father. Thank you, Emma said simply. Darius inclined his head slightly. The past cannot be changed. but perhaps it can inform a more balanced future. As they continued toward the car, Emma caught sight of Noah and Sarah walking home together, the boy's hands moving animatedly as he described something to his mother. 6 months ago he had stood alone on a street corner, desperate to help his mother by selling his most precious possession. Now they walked with straight backs and steady steps, no longer bent under impossible burdens. One child with a bicycle and a sign had unwittingly catalyzed meaningful change. One vampire king had recognized a system failure rather than an isolated incident. One community had begun the difficult work of true integration rather than mere coexistence. It wasn't perfect. The power imbalances remained. The fundamental nature of vampire-human relations continued to evolve in ways both promising and concerning. But for tonight, in this district, children would sleep with full stomachs in warm homes. Parents would work with dignity for fair compensation. And a silent boy had found his voice, teaching others to hear in new ways. Emma thought of the sign Noah had held that rainy October night. "Buy my bike, $50. Mommy hasn't eaten in 2 days." Such a simple, desperate plea, such a profound indictment of a system's failure. The bike now hung as a symbol in the community center lobby, a reminder of where they had begun and how far they had come. Not an ending, but a beginning, not perfection, but progress. In a world transformed by the emergence of immortal predators, perhaps that was the most human victory of all. The stubborn insistence that every voice mattered, even those that spoke only with their hands.